Shalom, you guys, and welcome to Wisdom and Torah Ministries. I'm always delighted to share with you some of the stuff that we're learning and understanding about the Bible. Today, I want to share with you something that I've been looking into temple research. As you know, that's some of the areas that I focus a lot of my time. I'm connecting so you'll know my type of study goes like this. I go from the throne of God and I go from the inside out, as this week's Torah portion teaches us in regards to how the tabernacle was built. You know, the Lord began building the tabernacle from the inside out, the Ark of the Holy, of the Holies, and the Holy Holies, and then extending it from the inside out. Just like our relationship with the Creator should be, from the inside out. So, as I do my research in the temple, you know, when you go from the inside out and all the things that are used in the temple, it is important to also remember that, we need to recognize topography and geography. And I've been watching some videos of all the people's research because I'm always looking to improve my understanding of the temple and trying to learn. The whole idea is to learn. And I surely don't think I know everything. I'm always constantly learning, challenging myself to learn from other people. My teacher is Joseph Good. And in my opinion, he's one, if not the best, that I've been able to find on this topic and many other topics. Okay, so one of the things that I want to revisit is, where's the location of the temple? In my virtual reality temple that we have, Joseph Good and I, and also the app, we want to do our best to show you the topography and the relationship between the topography and understanding the Bible. Many times when we study the temple, we are separating ourselves from the context of the geographical and topographical descriptions of the temple in the Bible. And it's a huge mistake when we do that. Okay, you cannot think you can move the temple to any location we think logically the way according to our theology, because it doesn't work that way. God's temple is God's temple. It's a blueprint. So therefore, he establishes certain orders and certain principles that cannot be messed with. That's what we're going to be looking into today. All right, so, one of the things that I want to share with you is about temple location. I'm going to use some tools. So I'm going to show you this map that we have in our virtual reality. I recorded the area. I want to share it with you, and I'm going to be speaking with you as you see the video, okay? Now, I'm going to show you on the Temple Mount, looking from the Mount of Olives. Our direction is from east to west, looking towards the Mount of Olives. And then it's going to be in a loop, so you're going to be able to see it over and over and over. And I'm going to be reading from Scripture certain things that are very important in order to understand the temple location, okay? Then I'm going to run you through it on my app that I have of the temple. And you can see, for example, you can see right here, you can see the topography. This is the city of Jerusalem in the 1st century, okay? Now, the city of Jerusalem is holy, and the temple is located on the northeast side of the city of Jerusalem. We're looking from, obviously, the top. The bottom of your screen will be the Kidron Valley, and it would also be the Mount of Olives. You see the elevation there. On the right side of the screen, I'm going to make it a little closer so you see what I mean. You're going to see, let me change the language so you can see, because I'm doing it in English here. Okay, so, I need to go to a location. If I go to the location, then I'm able to change the language. I apologize. Go right here, go English, go back, and then go back to the map. Okay, so as I'm getting close to it, I am not going to focus on the whole map. I'm going to only focus on the right side of the screen, on the right side of the temple. It says House of the Hearth, but look at Gethsemane. Now I'm going to go to Gethsemane, and we're going to look west. Okay, as I turn around here, I'm looking west, and that's the original eastern gate of the temple. Okay, then I'm going to go back to the map, and you're going to see where it says the House of the Spark and also the House of the Hearth. Now, on the right side of where those names are located, you will see a huge area, like a huge plaza. That is called the Fort Antonia. When we get closer, you will see as we get closer, More names keep coming up, but I want you to focus in Fort Antonia. Now, in order to show you this a little bit better, and the argument that we see right now in social media is whether or not the temple was on the Temple Mount, because people are pushing for Fort Antonia to be on the whole Temple Mount because they think they needed enough area to accommodate 5,000 people, let's say 14,000 people. When, as a matter of fact, during the high holidays in Israel, there were over 18,000 priests, only the priests in the temple. That's not including their families. That's not including the regular Levites and their families doing Passover, Pentecost, and Sukkot. But we are concerned about 14,000 Romans, okay, that supposedly they were on the Temple Mount when the whole mount is holy. The city is holy. The whole Temple Mount is holy. Now, Eilat Mazar, as I was speaking with her about 3 years ago, she did a brand new research and paper in which she found evidence of the 10th Legion. I'm going to show you in two areas they found evidence of the 10th Legion before the destruction of the temple. Before the destruction on the temple, on the Temple Mount. Remember, the temple was a fort, okay, to God, okay? So watch. Let me show you. She actually mentioned this to me. And I'm going to show you in the map because it'll be easier. So when you pull out a little bit more, now you go all the way to the north. On the north side, on the top of the screen where I have my cursor, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. You see like a little fortress up there? That was Herod's palace. Herod's palace. They found evidence, and they believed that the 10th Legion at one point or another would have been close to this area, or the Bethesda Valley, which is all this area right out here that was completely empty at the time of Yeshua, of the Messiah. The third wall was built after the year 44 of Common Era, and we know that Yeshua died in the year 30 and resurrected in the year 30. So understanding topography, history, and geography is very important. Now, let me show you something really interesting. Now, you see what the rectangular area is right in here where the cursor is. Let me move it down a little. Okay, this is called the Fort Antonia. Now, this is called the Bethesda Valley. The Bethesda Valley, that's where the pool of Bethesda is found. It was an indention. It was a 250 feet wide by 60 feet deep. That area existed in the topography, and the natural topography of Israel has always been there. Now, this is the key to really understand the temple location. Now, some people want to move the temple building to the right of the current golden dome. Now, if you do that, you have to consider the whole area surrounding the temple. There were walls. They're called the walls around the temple as 500 by 500 cubits. Where do we find that? We find that in the chapter 42, verse 15 to verse 20 of the book of Ezekiel. Now, this was the same dimension of the area on top of the Temple Mount surrounding the buildings. Now, this is important because if we go to, and I'm going to take you there real quick. Let me take you there right away so you see what I mean, the walls that I'm talking about. And I'm going to take you to the trumpeting stone area so you can really see a great view from it. And these tools really help you to get a visual. So I'm walking north right now. Okay? I'm walking north. And now you notice there is a wall encasing the buildings inside on the Temple Mount. Now there is a huge outer wall, the one you're looking in front of them right here. That is the extension to the west that Herod built. Herod built from this wall right here. Watch my cursor. This wall is the 500 by 500 cubits that the Bible talks about. That is the original western wall that you're looking at, that you're going up and down the cursor. To the left of that, it was all an extension by the Herodian kingdom. Now the whole mountain is holy. That wall becomes part of the holy city. But that is not the original western wall on the Temple Mount. It used to be this one. Literally, I could take you there today and I could show you exactly where it was located. We have the archaeology and we have pictures of it. Okay, so now if you look to the east, I'm looking to the east, you see that wall on the Temple Mount. Now, ask anyone who says the temple was in the city of David and ask them if they know the biblical reference to that wall or whether or not they existed, and they have no idea. And it actually says this in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 42. Chapter 42, verse 15 says this. Now, when he had finished measuring the inner temple, he brought me out to the gateway that faces toward the east, towards the east, and measured all around. He measured the east side with the measuring rod, 500 rods, that's cubits, by the measure of the measuring rod all around. He measured the north side, 500 cubits, by the measuring rod all around. He measured the south side. What you're looking at right now is a south wall on the Temple Mount of the verse that I'm reading. He says he measured the south side, 500 cubits, by the measuring rod. He came around to the west side, which is there, that wall right here, from the north, on the top of the screen, all the way to this corner. That's a western wall. That's the original western wall, and it's 500 cubits. And he says, and he measured it on the four sides, and it had a wall all around, 500 cubits long and 500 cubits wide, to separate the holy areas from the common. Why? Because this area right here was extended by Herod, and it's called it's Holy Mountain, but it didn't have the same level of kedusha, holiness, as once you go through that wall. Okay, they're the levels of holiness. So let me take you down there to see what I mean. I'm gonna do something you're not supposed to do, and if my teacher Joe sees me, he'll get mad at me. Okay, there's a protocol. We're supposed to follow the protocol, but for the sake of time, let's go through here. So I'm walking on the in the area where the royal stoa would have been on the south, and we are on the Temple Mount, and we're going to go through one of the main gates of the temple. There were 5 gates, 2 to the south, 1 to the west, 1 to the north that only the priest could use, and there were 2 on the east. 1 on the east, I'm sorry. So I'm going to go through this door. Now this area now becomes holier than the rest of the Temple Mount. This is the 500 by 500 wall the Bible was talking about. Now I'm going to walk to the original western wall. When people start talking about the temple, they need to show you this stuff. If they're not showing you this, they're not understanding the temple. They're just coming up with their own theories based on their own ideas, and they're creating a lot of division, unfortunately, when the evidence is so readily available. Now, you see that fence on the right? This fence is called the Soreg. Now, where I'm standing here, where I'm teaching you from right now, anyone can be there. Women, children, men, Israelite, Levite, priests, Gentiles can be there. People from the nations can walk all around the temple. We can be in this area. But only people in covenant can go beyond the fence on the right. Now, I'm on the west side of the temple. This is the western side of the temple, inside the 500 by 500s. 500 by 500. I'm going to quickly walk outside. Now, this is the original western wall. I'm going to quickly walk outside, going west. Now I am outside the 500 by 500. Remember, this is the original 500 by 500 wall the Bible talks about. This is it. This is where all the where all the buildings in verse chapters 24 of Matthew, verse 1 talks about. All the buildings are inside the 500 by 500. When I'm walking, you see the area where I'm walking to right now? This area was all added by Herod. All this area was all added by Herod. Now, in the time of Solomon, where I'm standing was a cliff, because to my left, right this way, is called the Ethropian Valley. So Herod, he put in dirt over here. He put walls all around outside of the original 500 by 500. And then he filled it in with dirt. And then he made another common area. What we see today is the Herodian expansion wall. It's going to go dark here in a minute. And then it'll come back. Now, I am now where a bridge was. Now, let me tell you what it's incredible how if we just learn to do a little bit of research, we learn a lot about the topography. Now, you know where I'm standing right now? I'm standing right now where the Western Wall is today. Now, you see, the modern day Western Wall is actually where the cursor is right now. Where's the cursor? The modern day wall is here. Where they praying every day on the Hakotel is right here. Now, let me go all the way down. I'm going to jump all the way down. And I'm going to look up. When you look at any picture of the Western Wall, okay, let me retrace my steps here a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, I'm going to go to the light so you can see. Then I'm looking south. That's a Robinson's Arch. Anyone who's been to Israel with me would know what the Robinson's Arch is. That is a southwest corner where the trampoline stone is. Now watch. This is how big the wall was. All of this right now today is under the underground in Jerusalem. Now, if you go to Jerusalem today and you want to go to the Western Wall, you would actually be able to see that little arch. That is called Wilson's Arch. That was one of the main entrances in the time of the Second Temple period, in which there was a bridge that if you go to Jerusalem, you walk by it all the time. When you go from the Jaffa Gate and you're walking down by the Muslim area, when you're trying to get to Jerusalem, to the city, and you walk all the way down where all the shops are, above the shops used to be the bridge that used to carry water from Solomon's pools all the way to the temple via this aqueduct and pedestrian passage. This came all the way from Jaffa Gate in the south and the western and the northwestern corner of the Western Wall, outside the city walls. Okay? I'll show you what that means. So if you go to Jerusalem today and you want to go pray, you literally will be praying right up here. You will be standing where the cursor is right now. So all of this area, all the way to the bottom, I was able to see a lot of it with Dan Bahat. I had a private tour with Dan Bahat a year ago. And they were having some discoveries that now are public that he showed me and my family when we were there. So this is the Western Wall, retaining wall built by Herod to give more security to the Temple Mount. Let's go back to the top, to the map. So you see where the red arrow is? That's where we were. That's the extension that Herod built right in here. Now you can see the original Western Wall. Look where I was, outside the extension, to the Herodian Wall, to the original Western Wall all along here. So the temple was inside, though that encasing it by those 500 by 500. If you notice, it's a square, 500 by 500. Right here. And then inside you have another square, the Soreg. And inside the Soreg you have all the temple buildings. Beit Otrot, Beit Aptinas, Beit Hanitzot, Beit Hamoked, the temple building, all the chambers outside in the court of the women. But notice there's a wall on the north, right over here. I'm trying to go as slow as I can so you can see all this topography, and I'm going to show you the other map in a minute. So clearly on the Temple Mount, you could have fit the temple within the dimensions the Bible talks about, 500 by 500 cubits, and still be able to put Antonia to the north of it, on the northern side of the Temple Mount, without encroaching on the holy area where the Bible tells us all the buildings have to be within 500 and 500. Herod extended to the west. Herod extended to the south, but he could not extend to the east. Okay, that's the only time he is only to the east. That's it. The eastern wall, that's the from north to south. That was basically it. They cannot go any farther because of the Kidron Valley. You could extend to the north, but the problem is on the north you have the Bethesda Valley. Look for a topographical map. Look for Charles Warren topographical map, and you'll see it. All right, and if you look into the topographical map, you see that immediately north of this wall, right here. And this is when people say, and they want to move the temple, when they want to move the temple building from here to here, because they want the dome to remain, because they actually think the temple was of the Antichrist, which is the biggest ridiculous lack of study they're doing. And I hate to be that forward, but it gets to a point that it gets ridiculous. The anti-Semitism within the body is crazy, and in the systems of religion, that instead of doing the proper research and putting the time to do it, they just believe anybody who just want to logically try to fix everything in their boxes that they're used to thinking. So they want the dome here and the temple building here. But ladies and gentlemen, it was not just the temple building. You have buildings on the side of the temple that have function. It was a huge enterprise of the temple proper. You needed to have a lot of things. So if you move the temple building, you have to move all the buildings to the corners with it. That means that the temple building, if you study the topography, would have been right next to the cliff of the Bethesda Valley during the first temple period. And the buildings like Beit Hanitzot and Beit HaMoked, where the Levites and the priests, they slept and they did their work, would have been in the cliff, in the air. When Josephus clearly tells us, then the general Pompey, when he tries to conquer Jerusalem, right after the Hasmonean family, that he filled in the northwest corner. The northwest corner. I'm going to show you where it was. Okay, let me get you closer here. You see where the Antonia is? That's where the fortress is. Josephus talks about also the plaza. The plaza was located east of the Antonia, but it's outside the wall that divided the holy mountain from the rest of the buildings. Remember, keep this in mind, 500 by 500. Every building had to be built of the temple that was holy within the 500 by 500. You can build anything outside of the 500, like you see here to the north. You still be on the Temple Mount, but it's not the same holiness as inside the Temple Mount. Okay? Within the 500 by 500. All right. So now, General Pompey, he filled in the area over here in order to conquer the temple through the north during the Hasmonean family. On the north part, right over here. That's the only way he could do it, because the topography would have limited them to do it from the south, from the west, and from the east. In the east, you have the Kidron Valley. The building was huge. Okay, the wall was huge. And then you had the cliff was huge. You can do it through the south. It was already within the city walls. You could not do it through the west. It was already within the city walls. It was protected by the people and by the temple walls at the time. The only location they could have conquered through was through the north. He filled in the area, and then he put in a tower, and the soldiers jumped over the wall that way. Now, when Herod took power, he put walls on the west. He extended to the south, and he extended to the north. He filled in the area where you see right here the plaza. Let me show it to you in the loop. Okay, so I'm looking for the Mount of Olives, looking west. You see the temple. You see the temple in the center. Look to the right of it. To the right of it, okay? To the right, you see the plaza and the Antonia. It's outside of the 500 by 500. It's on the Temple Mount, but it's not in the most holy areas. There you see it. Now, what Herod did, he encased the whole mountain. But he kept the holiness of the temple separated from the rest of the mountain. All the buildings are inside the 500 by 500. Antonia can still be fixed on the Temple Mount. After Herod, he filled it in. He encased it. He filled in the Bethesda Valley. He made it more a flat area of 37 acres. And now he's able to put the Royal Stoa to the south, as you're looking at there, by looking at the Kidron Valley. And now you're looking at the Antonia alongside the north. You see the green arrow right there is showing you the north 500 by 500 wall that the Bible prescribes. Every building is in its proper place. Now, if that building is moved to the north to accommodate the theology or the theories of people, what happened to the other side buildings that the temple had? If you look at there, you see it had buildings to the side of the main building. Where would those buildings be if you move the temple building to the right of it? Then it would not make any sense. Understanding temple purity, temple law, temple location, and geography allows us to know where everything is. We need to stop listening to people who don't know what in the world they're talking about. They're just making up stuff. And they're changing God's ways. And we have to be very careful. Let me prove it to you. So let's go to Ezra chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 3 and 4. And then we're going to go to chapter 5, verse 15. And it says, they're coming back from Babylon. The first temple was destroyed. Remember, the temple is a blueprint. No one can change the blueprint. Talk to any architect. Talk to an architect and ask him. If you make a blueprint and you sign it and you are a legit architect by law, ask him, can anyone who is not authorized change the blueprint? And he will tell you, no, it's a crime. It's illegal. So if the Lord is the architect of the temple and he told Moses, build it according to the pattern, then he gave the pattern to David later on, and then he gave it to Ezekiel later on. And he says in Ezekiel, you got to have 500 by 500, and all the buildings are inside the 500 by 500. You could expand to the south, to the west, and to the north, and it's still inside the city, which is holy, but it's not as holy as inside the 500 by 500. It's called Kedusha, levels of holiness. In the Mishnah, Kelim. If the people in the Hebrew roots movement and the people in Christianity would at least consider reading some of these resources that tells us, by the way, primary sources. Eliezer ben Yaakov, he was a priest who lived in the first century, who wrote everything down for us to know. He wrote a whole tractate, a whole chapter called Midot, measurements, tells us everything we need to know. But we don't look into those resources. We rather listen to people who've never been really researchers of the temple. And it concerns me because this is holy. This is the house of the king. Okay, we need to have a little more respect for that. So they come back from Babylon. And it says, verse 2, then Yeshua, son of Hosadak, and his brethren the priests, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and his brethren, arose and built the altar of God of Israel. They built the altar. Let me ask you a question. When they came back from Babylon, could they build the altar any which way they wanted to, however they saw fit, or there were a prescribed way that they had to do it? So that means that when Solomon built the temple, or he gave the resources to build the temple, and the priests built the temple, when they came back from Babylon, that means that the building had to be in the same place where it was located in the first temple. The altar had to be located exactly in the same place where the blueprint determined by David and Solomon that God gave them in the first temple. They could not change the altar to any other place. Let's continue reading. It says, and build an altar to God of Israel to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the Torah of Moses, men of God. Though fear had come upon them because of the people of those countries, They set the altar on its basis, and they offer burnt offerings to the Lord, to honor to the Lord, both in the morning and in the evenings, just like the Torah says in the book of Numbers. Now, when you go to chapter 5 and verse 15 of the same book, Ezra, says this. And he said to him, let me read verse 14 for better context. Verse 13. However, the first year Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to build this house of God. Remember, when a king makes a decree, not even a king can break his own decree, okay? Also, the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple that was in Jerusalem and carried into the temple of Babylon. Those King Cyrus took from the temple of Babylon, and they were given to one named Sheshbazzar, who he had made governor. And he said to him, listen to this, take these articles, go carry them into the temple site that is in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be rebuilt in its former site. Let it be rebuilt in its former site. That means that the altar had to be in the same place in the first temple as it was in the second temple, and they cannot be changed for the expansion and the remodeling of the Herodian period. So the altar was in the same place. Okay? Let's go to 1 Chronicles 28, another verse of interest. 1 Chronicles 28. I have it as a reference, so I want to go there. I lost the verse. Verse 11 to 25. It says, Then David gave his son Solomon the plans of the vestibule, its houses, its treasuries, its upper chamber, its inner chambers, and the place of the mercy seat. As you see, it's not just the blueprint of the temple building, but every building next to the temple building. It's not just, there were over 16 buildings in the temple proper within the 500 by 500. How do we know? Because Matthew chapter 24 tells us. Matthew 24 says this. Now Yeshua went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. But wait. He departed from the temple, but they're showing him the buildings of the temple. If you're standing on the western wall today, you will not be able to see any building on the Temple Mount. You cannot see the Golden Dome. You cannot see anything. The only way that you can see the temple buildings would be if you are outside of the 500 by 500, somewhere in there, on the Temple Mount, but not outside the Herodian extension. You will not be able to see any of the buildings. Understanding topography and geography, you will know that. Okay? So, let's keep reading. In verse 12 of chapter 28 of 1 Chronicles, and the plans for all that he had by the Spirit of the courts of the house of the Lord, of all the chambers all around. You see, there were chambers all around. And at the treasuries of the house of God, and at the treasuries of the dedicated things. Also for the division of the priests and the Levites, for all the work of the service of the house of the Lord, for all the articles of the service in the house of the Lord. He gave gold by weight. In other words, if you keep reading the whole thing, it tells you exactly how it worked. So when we go back to the app, or let me take you to this particular, when I take you to the other one right here, there you go. Okay, you can see all the buildings within the 500. Forget about the big building on the south, on the left of your screen. That's the Royal Stoa. That was later added by Herod. I'm going to remember that. We're going to be focusing on the middle of your screen when you have all of those buildings in the middle of the mountain right there. Those are all ordained by God. If you move the middle building, the nice one and golden one, to the right, what are you going to do with the buildings to the right of that? That means that the whole structure has to be moved. Not just a temple building, but every building that has any function. So if you go back to the first temple period, those buildings existed. That means that the buildings on the right that you see there would have been on the Bethesda Valley, on a cliff. Okay, the only reason why the Antonia was so big at the time of the first century was because Herod, he filled in the whole Bethesda Valley, and he made it a whole area for the Antonia, which he expanded on, and also the plaza for the Antonia. But that did not exist during the first temple period. Hopefully, this can bring some kind of clarity to our understanding of the temple. Yes, that's the Kidron Valley looking south. But we need, and we owe it to ourselves, to do a little bit more research in some of these areas. And if you don't have the time to do it, then I'm willing to do it for you and share it with you. We're looking west to the whole city of Jerusalem. We're walking west towards the Kidron Valley, and I'm pointing with a green arrow there, with a green line, where the Bethesda Valley would have been, and that's where the Herodian expansion occurred, and then he expanded on the Baris, which is the royal, Antonia. So it is clear, once you do the research and you go to Jerusalem, how these things can be easily understood and answered if only we take every consideration into account. Holiness of the temple, topography of the city of Jerusalem before Herodian period, during the Hasmonean period, during the first temple period, and beforehand. If you do not consider that information, then anyone who will tell you anything that seems to be logical, they'll tell you, no. The Dome of the Rock can be here and the temple can be to the north because it's the temple of the Antichrist anyway. That is rubbish. That's ridiculous. Okay? The temple of God is always holy because God ordained it. And by the way, you know how we know if we really do some research on ancient Near Eastern history? Do it. It won't take you very long. When a kingdom will conquer another kingdom, they will do certain things to that kingdom that just conquered. They just conquered. They would try to destroy the king and their whole line by killing them. They destroy sacred spaces like temples and special buildings. And they also try to rape the women so they would not have a progeny or a descendants that will become patriots to try to restore their honor again. But the key here is that they used to build their own temples on top of the destroyed temples of the conquered king, because it's all about sacred spaces. So if a king like the Muslims, they conquered at the time of the Crusaders. If the Crusaders will win, they will destroy anything that was holy. What did the Romans do? They destroyed the temple, and then later on, they built the temple right where the temple was. So they can impose imperial worship as a sign of victory over the enemies. When the Crusaders came in, they built something else on there. When the Muslims came in, then they built the Dome of the Rock as a sign of victory over the Christians and the Jews. So why would we move the temple to the city of David? There's not one shred of evidence, not even one, that points to a temple ever being built by Solomon, by the Hasmonean family expanding there, or the Herodian period. Okay, they found some evidence of ancient Near Eastern Canaanite, the Jebusite city before David, in the bottom of the Shiloach. Okay, in the bottom of the Shiloach, they found some evidence of an altar. But even the time of David, the Ark of the Covenant was in the city of David, but the tabernacle was in Givon, about 2 miles north of the city of David. And it tells us that when Solomon built the temple and he dedicated the temple, that they took the Ark of the Covenant from the city of David and they moved it north to the temple. So if the temple is in the city of David, why would you take the Ark of the Covenant out of the city of David to take it north? It's in the same location. It doesn't add up, people. It doesn't add up at all. And I'm saying this with the utmost confidence by me talking to Ilan Mazar, reading all the research of her grandfather, Benjamin Mazar, by having a personal tour with Dan Bahat, by doing all the research, Joseph and I, in Israel for 2 straight years, and also doing all the research of Charles Warren, Charles Wilson, Conrad Sheik, and all the other people who came in the 1800s who have validated all this information. In other words, I cannot change anything that is established that is truth. Logic is not important here. It's biblical law versus the topography and the geography and all of the evidence that we have that overwhelmingly supports the temple on the Temple Mount. So please be careful, because there's some things that are not up for discussion. There's some things that are concrete. Talking about the holiness of God and the temple and the feast and the Sabbath, be careful how you deal with those, because that comes under the realm of Kedusha, holiness of God. Remember, the sacrifices were for the Lord. The altar is for the Lord according to the Torah of Moses. So no one can change those things. A priest could not change the location. As a matter of fact, where's the book? I have it right over there. Jeremiah, there it is. It says, Jerusalem in the temple of in the time of Jesus. Jeremiah tells us that in the time of Herod, when he expanded the Hasmonean period's temple, okay, when he expanded to the north, to the west, and to the south, they needed to remodel the temple building. Okay, they made it nice. They never changed the location. They never changed the function. They remodeled it. Did you know that Herod never went into this area? Let me show you. Let me show you this. Did you know that Herod, talking about the king of Israel, okay, Herod could never go beyond this point while I'm talking to you right now. Let me show you where. Herod was a convert, but the king of Israel had the right to sit somewhere in here. The only person that could sit anywhere in the temple in this area where you're looking at right now was the king of Israel of the line of David. If you were from Judah, but you're not a descendant of David, you cannot sit there. So now, Herod, because he was a converted Jew, he could walk up to this point. By the way, he could not go beyond this threshold. He cannot go on those 3 steps. He cannot do this right here. He cannot just jump up. And he was a king. And he cannot go in this area or he will die. Only the priest can go here. We see an example of that in one of the stories of the Bible, one of the kings of Israel, of a line of David. He presumed to be very arrogant, as the Bible calls him, and he went beyond that veil into the holy place. He wanted to offer incense, and the priest kicked him out, and he received leprosy at that moment, and then he died 15 years later. So if a king of David could not stand where I'm standing right there in the temple, could not go into the holy place, and the king of the first century, Herod, could never sit right here, somewhere in this area where I'm pointing with a cursor, in the place of Israel, where the Israelites can be. What makes you think that we can go into these areas now? There's not a temple clearly, but spiritually, we can't go into the Holy of Holies. Yeshua did that for us. So again, understanding all this topography and all of the geography gives us greater insight, and then you'll be able to discern when someone comes telling you something about the temple location. Look, I don't understand why it's so bad for the temple to be located on the Temple Mount where the Dome of the Rock is today. I don't understand that. Yes, the nations have profaned underfoot the holy mountain, but the Lord will restore his presence, he will restore his power, and he will restore his people and his temple on that mountain. By the way, the fact that the mountain, there are trees all over, defiles the mountain itself, because the Torah commands there are no trees to be within the city or even in the mountain, on the mountain, okay? So please consider all the research that we've given you and look into the topography and the geography. There's a huge amount of information you can find. There's a book called Underground Jerusalem, research by Conrad Sheik, Charles Warren, and Charles Wilson. And just pick who your resources will be in regards to the true location of the temple. Stop really listening to to videos that they would just show you something that sounds logical, that is not supported by real evidence, but by only speculation. Let us learn to be concise and have the evidence, and don't be afraid to question. If I'm wrong in something, I will change it. If I need to adapt something that I taught wrong, I will do it today in a second. But I'm not speaking to you out of assumptions. I'm sharing with you evidence that we have found, we have researched, and there's a lot more to be discovered. So therefore, we keep learning and we keep adapting. Okay? May the Lord bless you and keep you guys. Thank you so much for your time. Hey, if you want to study more with me, consider treasuresofthetemple.com. I have courses on the temple. Also in wisdomintorah.com. I have also in the yeshiva section, I have a lot on the temple and studies that Joseph Good and I have done together. And on-site research. I'll show you. If you go there, we have video on-site that we have gone 2 years in a row learning about the beautiful buildings and the beautiful things and all the evidence that we have in Jerusalem. Shalom to all of you. Bye-bye.